Most people are exhausted, not because life is hard, but because they react to everything. They argue with reality. They negotiate with emotions. They bleed energy, trying to control what was never theirs to control. Stoicism is not philosophy. It is a weapon. It teaches you how to stay calm when others collapse, silent when others panic, disciplined when others self-destruct. This audiobook will show you how emotional control becomes power, how detachment becomes dominance, and how the unshaken always outlast the emotional. If you master this, life stops pushing you around. Most people wake up already defeated, not because the day is hard, but because their mind is scattered across things they cannot control. Other people's opinions, outcomes they cannot predict, timing they cannot force, results they cannot guarantee. That is where suffering begins. You don't suffer because you lack talent. You don't suffer because life is unfair. You suffer because you aim your energy at the wrong target. That's the key. You are trying to control outcomes instead of actions, and outcomes do not listen. You have a choice. You can spend your life arguing with reality, or you can master the only territory that ever belonged to you, your actions. Focus on effort, not outcome. Focus on effort, not outcome. Focus on effort, not outcome. Repeat it until it replaces your instinct to panic. Because the moment you attach your peace to results, you lose your power. Outcomes are external. Actions are internal. Stoicism begins with this ruthless clarity. Energy only flows where control exists. If you cannot control it, it does not deserve your emotional investment. That's not cold, that's intelligent. Look at the people who stay calm when everything breaks. Leaders under pressure, commanders in chaos, executives making decisions while others freeze. They are not calmer because they care less. They are calmer because they understand the boundary. They control preparation. They control response. They control discipline. They do not control the market. They do not control the crowd. They do not control the storm. And because they accept that, they endure. You don't need their permission to detach. You don't need permission to stop obsessing over results. You have a choice. Every emotional reaction is a signal that you've crossed the boundary. Anger usually means you tried to control someone else. Anxiety means you tried to control the future. Frustration means you tried to control timing. That's not about weakness, it's about misdirected effort. It's not about fear, it's about discipline. It's not about stress, it's about focus. It's not about chaos, it's about clarity. You don't rise by predicting the future, you rise by preparing for it. Stoicism teaches you to shrink your battlefield. Most people fight everywhere. They argue with strangers, they worry about tomorrow, they replay yesterday. A Stoic fights on one front. What can I do right now? What action is within my control? What effort moves me forward regardless of outcome? That's the question that ends suffering. You don't control whether they respect you. You control whether you act with dignity. You don't control whether you win today. You control whether you train. You don't control whether life rewards you immediately. You control whether you show up again tomorrow. That's the advantage. Because when your peace is tied to effort, no one can steal it. You become stable, and stability is power. Look closely at chaos. It feeds on emotional people. The one who stays grounded becomes the reference point. In a crisis, everyone looks for the calm one. In uncertainty, people follow the steady one. In pressure, the composed one leads. Not because they have answers, but because they are not shaken. You have a choice. You can keep reacting to outcomes you can't command, or you can build a system of actions that never depends on luck.
This is where Stoicism stops being philosophy and becomes practice. Here's what you do. First, separate action from result. You train without demanding immediate progress. You speak without needing approval. You work without applause. That's the discipline. Second, audit your emotional triggers. Every time you feel disturbed, ask one question. Was this within my control? If the answer is no, release it immediately. Not tomorrow, not later, now. That's the key. Third, define success by effort. Did you show up? Did you execute? Did you hold your standards? If yes, you won, even if the world says otherwise. This rewires your mind. Most people collapse because their identity depends on outcomes. When results fail, they feel like failures. You don't need their permission to define success differently. You define it through discipline. That's why Stoics don't break easily. Loss does not crush them. Delay does not poison them. Criticism does not derail them. They expect none of it to obey them. And because of that, they are rarely surprised. Prepared minds don't panic. This chapter is not telling you to stop caring. It's telling you to care correctly. Care about effort. Care about preparation. Care about response. Release everything else. You are not powerless. You are misdirected. And once direction is corrected, strength returns. You don't rise by forcing outcomes. You rise by becoming consistent. That's the quiet truth no one teaches. Consistency beats intensity. Discipline beats emotion. Control beats chaos. You have a choice. Today, choose the narrow path. Control what you can. Release the rest. Because once you stop fighting reality, you reclaim your energy. And that energy becomes momentum. You mastered the boundary of control. Now it's time to understand what happens when emotion enters the equation. You don't need to feel everything to be powerful. You need to command it. Now, let's talk about the edge that separates leaders from reactors.
Most people believe intelligence wins. It doesn't. Most people believe talent wins. It doesn't. In the real world, under pressure, in conflict, in high-stakes moments, emotional control wins. That's the key. Calm people think clearly. Emotional people self-sabotage. And self-sabotage is silent. It looks like overreacting. It sounds like explaining too much. It feels like urgency, anger, fear, and impatience. You have a choice. You can let emotions run the moment, or you can run the moment by mastering emotion. Whoever controls emotion controls the room. Say it again. Whoever controls emotion controls the room. Look at any negotiation. The person who speaks less listens more. The person who stays calm sees leverage. The emotional one reveals desperation. That's not about intelligence. It's about discipline. It's not about confidence. It's about control. It's not about dominance. It's about composure. It's not about winning loudly. It's about winning quietly. Most people lose before they even speak. Their tone betrays them. Their body language leaks insecurity. Their urgency exposes need. You don't need their permission to slow down. You don't need permission to pause before responding. Silence is not weakness. Silence is processing. And processing beats reacting every time. In arguments, the emotional person escalates. They raise their voice. They interrupt. They repeat themselves. The calm person waits. And the moment the emotional one runs out of control, the calm one takes control. That's the advantage. Leaders understand this instinctively. In chaos, they don't rush to speak. They stabilize the room first by stabilizing themselves. People don't follow words, they follow states. Your emotional state becomes contagious. If you panic, the team panics. If you react, the room reacts. If you stay calm, everyone adjusts to you.
That's power. You have a choice. You can let your emotions leak into every interaction, or you can train yourself to contain them. Containment is not suppression. Containment is mastery. Stoicism does not tell you to feel nothing. It teaches you to feel without being controlled. Most people are dragged by emotion. A Stoic carries it. There's a difference. Think about pressure moments. A tough conversation, a critical decision, a moment where something is on the line. Emotional people rush. They fill silence. They overcommit. They say things they can't take back. Calm people pause. They let the other side reveal themselves. That's the key. Silence creates space. Space creates clarity. Clarity creates advantage. You don't need their permission to stop reacting immediately. You have a choice. Every time emotion rises, you either obey it or you observe it. Observation weakens emotion. Reaction feeds it. Here's the discipline. When you feel the surge, anger, excitement, fear, urgency, do nothing. Count, breathe, pause. Not forever, just long enough to regain command. That pause is where power lives. Most people never pause. That's why they are predictable. Predictable people are easy to manipulate. Unpredictable calm unsettles emotional minds. In leadership, this is everything. A leader who reacts creates instability. A leader who stays measured creates trust. People don't trust emotional volatility. They trust consistency. That's why the calm leader rises faster. Not because they know more, but because they don't panic when others do. You don't need their permission to develop this edge. You don't need permission to train your nervous system. This is not talent. This is practice. Here's what you stop doing. Stop responding immediately. Stop explaining when silence would work. Stop defending yourself emotionally. It's not about pride, it's about discipline. Here's what you start doing. You lower your tone under pressure. You slow your speech when others rush. You listen more than you talk. These are not social tricks. They are signals of control. And control changes dynamics instantly. In negotiations, the calm one sets the pace. In arguments, the calm one ends them. In leadership, the calm one becomes the anchor. Whoever controls emotion controls the room. Repeat it until it becomes instinct. This is why Stoicism gives you an unfair advantage. Life will provoke you. People will test you. Situations will pressure you. The question is never whether emotion will appear. The question is, will you obey it? You have a choice. You don't become powerful by feeling more. You become powerful by choosing when to act on feeling. That's the key. Every time you hold composure, you build authority. Every time you resist reaction, you gain leverage. Every time you choose calm, you widen the gap. Over time, people notice. They don't say it out loud, but they feel it. They become cautious around you. They measure their words. They adjust their energy. Because calm presence commands respect without asking for it. You don't need their permission. This chapter is not about becoming cold. It's about becoming deliberate. Emotion should inform you, not command you. And when you master that, you stop losing invisible battles. You stop sabotaging negotiations. You stop fueling arguments. You stop handing power away emotionally. That's the Stoic advantage. You mastered the boundary of control. Now you've learned how emotion determines power. But there is another layer, one that multiplies this advantage even further. Because the next level is not about speaking better, it's about knowing when not to speak at all. You've learned to control emotion. Now let's talk about the weapon that calm people use best.
Reality does not negotiate. It does not explain itself, and it does not care how you feel about it. That's the key. Most people are not tired because life is hard. They're tired because they keep arguing with what already is. They say, this shouldn't have happened. They say, it's not fair. They say, I didn't deserve this. And every sentence like that drains power. You have a choice. You can resist reality, or you can accept it and move. Resistance creates pain. Acceptance restores power. Say it clearly. Accept fast, adjust faster. Accept fast, adjust faster. That phrase is not philosophy, it's survival. Look at loss. Most people collapse not because they lost, but because they keep replaying it. They argue with the past, they wish it away, they relive it emotionally, but the past does not listen. Reality already happened. The Stoic understands this immediately. Loss is information, rejection is data, delay is feedback. It's not about denial, it's about discipline. It's not about numbness, it's about clarity. It's not about surrender, it's about speed. The faster you accept, the faster you regain control. That's the key. Rejection is one of the clearest examples. An emotional mind asks, why didn't they choose me? A disciplined mind asks, what do I do next? One question traps you, the other frees you. You don't need their permission to move forward. You don't need permission to stop replaying the moment. Reality has already spoken. Arguing with it only delays your next move, and delay is costly. Most people suffer twice, first from the event, second from their resistance to it. Stoicism eliminates the second wound. It says, this is what is. No drama, no story, no emotional negotiation, just truth. And truth is light. When you stop fighting reality, energy returns. You feel it immediately. The mind clears, the body relaxes, the next step becomes visible. That's the advantage. Delays work the same way. You wanted it now. It didn't happen. Most people panic, they rush, they force, and they make mistakes. A Stoic slows down, not emotionally, strategically. They ask, what is this delay asking me to refine? What is this time giving me to build? That's the key. Delay is not denial, it's preparation in disguise, but only if you accept it quickly. Accept fast, adjust faster. Repeat it until it replaces frustration. Here's the discipline. The moment you feel resistance, tight chest, racing thoughts, emotional heat, stop. Ask one question. Am I arguing with reality right now? If the answer is yes, you already know what to do. Drop the argument. Not tomorrow, now. Acceptance is not passive. Acceptance is the first step to intelligent action. You cannot adjust to something you refuse to see. That's why emotional people stay stuck. They keep saying, this shouldn't be happening, while disciplined people say, this is happening. Now what? You have a choice. Life will disappoint you. Plans will fail. People will leave. None of that requires your emotional collapse. It requires your adaptation. And adaptation is a skill. Stoicism trains this muscle relentlessly. It teaches you to see reality clearly without decoration. No exaggeration, no self-pity, no false hope. Just facts. Facts are not cruel. They are clean. Clean information allows clean decisions. That's the key. When something ends, stop begging it to continue. When someone leaves, stop chasing closure. When timing fails, stop forcing outcomes. Release the argument. The moment you do, power shifts back to you. You don't need their permission to accept. You don't need permission to stop hoping things were different. You need discipline. Here's what you stop doing. Stop saying, why me? Stop replaying conversations. Stop mentally negotiating with the past. Here's what you start doing. Name the reality clearly. State it without emotion. Then choose your next action. That is Stoic strength. This is how calm people recover faster, not because they feel less pain, but because they don't add resistance to it. Pain plus resistance equals suffering. Pain plus acceptance equals progress. That's the formula. Accept fast, adjust faster. Say it again. Accept fast, adjust faster. The world respects speed, not rushing, clarity. The faster you accept reality, the sooner you're ahead of those still arguing with it. Most people stay stuck in should have been. Stoics live in what is.
And what is where action exists. This chapter is not about becoming passive, it's about becoming precise. You don't waste energy on what cannot be changed, you invest it where it can be used. That is the Stoic advantage. You mastered control, you learned emotional composure, now you've learned acceptance. But there's another layer, one that multiplies your power even more, because once you stop arguing with reality, you must also stop clinging to outcomes. Attachment is the next trap. You've accepted what is. Now, let's talk about letting go of what you want too tightly.
Most people misunderstand detachment. They think detachment means coldness. They think it means not caring. They think it means isolation. That's wrong. Detachment is not weakness. Attachment is. That's the key. Attachment creates fear. Fear creates hesitation. Hesitation creates manipulation. Detachment creates leverage. Say it clearly. Needing less makes you harder to control. Needing less makes you harder to control. You have a choice. You can need approval, or you can need alignment with your standards. One makes you dependent. The other makes you free. Look closely at attachment. People who need validation explain too much. People who need approval tolerate disrespect. People who need acceptance betray themselves quietly. Not because they are bad people, but because fear is steering the wheel. Fear of rejection, fear of loss, fear of being misunderstood. That's not about love, it's about insecurity. It's not about connection, it's about discipline. It's not about caring, it's about control. And control disappears the moment you need something from someone else. That's the trap. The more you need approval, the more predictable you become. The more predictable you become, the easier you are to manipulate. You don't need their permission to detach. Detachment does not mean you abandon people. It means you stop handing them power over your emotional state. There's a difference. A Stoic does not cling. A Stoic chooses. They choose to engage. They choose to stay. They choose to walk away. And because it's a choice, it's powerful. People who are attached cannot walk away. People who are detached always can. That's leverage. Look at negotiations again. The person who needs the deal loses the deal. The person who can walk away sets the terms. Not because they are aggressive, but because they are not afraid. Fear leaks. It leaks through tone, through body language, through urgency. And urgency kills authority. Needing less makes you harder to control. Repeat it until it replaces your instinct to chase. Approval is the most common attachment. People shape their words to be liked. They suppress truth to avoid tension. They stay silent to keep peace. But peace bought with self-betrayal is expensive. It costs respect. And without respect, connection collapses anyway. That's the irony. You don't need their permission to be firm. You don't need permission to disappoint people. Disappointment is unavoidable when you live by standards. That's not cruelty, that's clarity. Detachment allows you to say no without guilt. It allows you to hear criticism without panic. It allows you to lose without collapse. That's the key. Attachment says, if this fails, I fail. Detachment says, if this fails, I learn. One traps you emotionally. The other strengthens you strategically. This is why Stoics appear calm under pressure. They are not emotionally fused to outcomes. They give effort fully. They release results completely. That balance creates freedom. You have a choice. You can cling to people, roles, outcomes, identities, or you can hold them lightly. Holding lightly does not reduce commitment. It removes fear.
and fear is what weakens performance. Athletes who fear losing tighten up. Speakers who fear judgment overthink. Leaders who fear backlash become indecisive. Detachment removes that noise. It's not about indifference, it's about independence. Here's the discipline. Ask yourself one question in every situation. What am I afraid of losing right now? Approval? Control? Image? Security? Once you name it, you weaken it. That's the key. Fear thrives in the unseen. Detachment is exposure. When you accept the possibility of loss, you stop being ruled by it. You don't need their permission to accept loss. Loss is part of strength. The Stoic trains this intentionally. They imagine losing comfort. They imagine losing status. They imagine losing approval. Not to suffer, but to realize they survive. And once you know you survive, fear loses authority. Needing less makes you harder to control. Say it again. Needing less makes you harder to control. Here's what you stop doing. Stop chasing reassurance. Stop adjusting yourself to be accepted. Stop negotiating your values emotionally. Here's what you start doing. You define your standards privately. You act from them publicly. You let outcomes fall where they may. That is Stoic confidence. Not loud, not performative, unshakable. People sense it immediately. Detached people don't beg, they don't pressure, they don't cling. They invite. And invitation is powerful. This chapter is not telling you to disconnect from life. It's teaching you to stop being owned by it. Ownership flows to the one who can walk away. That's the truth most people avoid. Because attachment feels like safety until it becomes a leash. You have a choice. You can keep needing, or you can start choosing. Detachment sharpens everything. Your decisions, your speech, your presence. And presence is influence. You mastered control. You mastered emotion. You accepted reality. Now you've learned detachment. But there is one skill that makes all of this visible in real time, because detachment shows up most clearly in how fast or slow you respond. The pause reveals everything. You've learned to let go. Now let's talk about mastering the space before action.
Most people live on autopilot. Something happens, they react. Something is said, they respond instantly. No space, no control, no power. That's the trap. Reaction is automatic. Response is power. That's the key. The pause is the difference. Say it again. The pause is the difference. Every argument you regret started without a pause. Every message you wish you hadn't sent ignored the pause. Every emotional mistake skipped the pause. You have a choice. You can react like everyone else, or you can pause and separate yourself from the crowd. Most people think speed is strength. It isn't. Speed without control is weakness. Pressure exposes this immediately. An insult lands. Disrespect appears. Someone challenges you publicly. The emotional mind reacts to defend the ego. The disciplined mind pauses to protect position. It's not about pride, it's about discipline. It's not about winning the moment, it's about owning the outcome. The pause creates space. Space creates choice. Choice creates authority. Without the pause, you don't choose, you obey emotion. And emotion is a terrible leader. Look at insults. An insult is bait. Reaction is the hook. The moment you snap back, you've accepted their frame. You've entered their game. That's the key. The pause breaks the pattern. When you don't react immediately, the other person feels it. They lose momentum. They lose control. Silence forces them to sit with what they said. Most people can't handle that.
They expected reaction, they expected defense, they expected escalation. The pause denies them all of it. You don't need their permission to pause before you speak. You don't need permission to take control of the moment. The pause is not passive, it is deliberate. It is the act of choosing your response instead of being dragged into one. Pressure moments reveal character. Deadlines, confrontations, unexpected problems. Emotional people rush. They speak too soon. They commit too fast. Calm people pause. They breathe. They assess. They respond precisely. That's power. You have a choice. You can treat every moment like an emergency, or you can slow down and dominate quietly. Stoicism trains the pause intentionally. Not once, not occasionally, every time emotion spikes. Anger rises, pause. Excitement surges, pause. Fear appears, pause. The pause is the difference. This is not theory, it's a skill, and skills are trained. Here's how you train it. First, notice the physical signal. Emotion always shows up in the body first. Tight jaw, fast breath, raised voice, racing thoughts. That's your cue. That's the moment to pause. Second, do nothing. No words, no messages, no decisions, just space. Even 3 seconds changes everything. That's the key. Third, ask one question. What response serves my long-term position? Not your ego, not your image, your position. That question instantly restores control. You don't need their permission to think before you speak. Most people are afraid of the pause. They fear silence. They fear being judged. They fear losing momentum. But silence does not weaken you. It strengthens you. In conversations, the one who pauses controls tempo. In negotiations, the one who pauses gains leverage. In conflict, the one who pauses wins without fighting. The pause signals confidence. Only insecure people rush to fill space. That's the truth. Reaction is loud. Response is measured. Reaction feels good in the moment. Response pays later. That's the difference between amateurs and masters. You have a choice. You can keep reacting and repairing damage, or you can pause and prevent it. Most regret comes from speed. Words said too fast, decisions made too early, emotions acted on without thought. The pause saves you from yourself. That's why it's powerful. It's not about suppressing emotion, it's about commanding it. Emotion can speak, it just doesn't get to decide. That's the Stoic rule. Here's what you stop doing. Stop responding immediately to messages. Stop replying emotionally to disrespect. Stop making decisions under emotional heat. It's not about avoidance, it's about discipline. Here's what you start doing. You delay response by default. You slow your speech under pressure. You let silence do the work. Silence plus composure unsettles emotional people. They start explaining, they start backtracking, they reveal more than they intended. That's the advantage. The pause gives you information. Reaction blinds you to it. Over time, this changes your reputation. People stop provoking you. They stop testing you emotionally. They sense that reactions won't come easily. That's respect. Not demanded, earned. The pause is the difference. Repeat it until it becomes automatic. The goal is not to be slow. The goal is to be deliberate. Deliberate people don't get dragged into chaos. They step above it. This chapter is about reclaiming space. Space between stimulus and response. Space between feeling and action. Space between pressure and decision. That space is where freedom lives. You mastered control. You mastered emotion. You accepted reality. You detached from outcomes. Now you've learned the pause. But there is something even more dangerous than reacting: talking too much. Because once you pause, you must decide when to speak and when not to. Silence is not empty, it's strategic. You've learned to pause before reacting. Now, let's talk about the discipline that follows.
Most people think discipline is punishment. They think structure is limitation. They think routine kills creativity. They think freedom means doing whatever they feel like. That belief is why their mind is loud. That's the key. Chaos feels like freedom at first, but it becomes a cage. Discipline feels restrictive at first, but it becomes liberation. You have a choice. You can let your day decide you, or you can decide your day. Discipline builds mental silence. Say it again. Discipline builds mental silence. Look at the average mind. Constant decisions, constant distractions, constant emotional negotiation. What should I do next? Should I rest or push? Should I respond or ignore? Should I eat this or that? That noise drains energy. Most people are not tired from work, they are tired from deciding. That's the problem discipline solves. Structure removes chaos from the mind. When you decide in advance, you don't debate in the moment. That's freedom. Daily routines are not boring, they are protective. They remove friction, they remove indecision, they remove emotional bargaining. Decision fatigue is real. The more choices you make, the weaker your judgment becomes. That's why emotional decisions happen late in the day. That's why discipline collapses at night. Stoics eliminate this weakness early. They automate what matters. Wake time, training time, work blocks, rest windows. Not because they lack freedom, but because they value it. Discipline builds mental silence. When the basics are locked in, the mind rests. You don't need their permission to live this way. You don't need permission to choose structure over chaos. It's not about rigidity, it's about reliability. It's not about control, it's about clarity. Freedom is not the absence of rules. Freedom is living by rules you chose. That's the key. People without structure chase motivation. People with structure don't need it. Motivation is unstable. Discipline is consistent. Consistency compounds. This is why disciplined people look calm. Their day is predictable, their priorities are clear, their mind is quiet. Quiet minds perform better. That's not opinion, that's reality. Look at high performers. Athletes don't improvise training. Soldiers don't guess routines. Surgeons don't feel their way through procedures. They rely on structure. Structure creates reliability. Reliability creates trust. Trust creates authority. You have a choice. You can keep improvising your life, or you can build systems that carry you when emotion fades. Discipline is not about doing more. It's about deciding once. Decide when you wake up. Decide when you train. Decide when you work. Decide when you rest. Then stop negotiating with yourself. That's where freedom appears. Most people break promises to themselves daily. That erodes self-respect. Discipline restores it. Every time you follow your structure, you reinforce identity. You become someone who keeps commitments. That's power. It's not about perfection, it's about discipline. It's not about intensity, it's about consistency. Mental silence comes from certainty. When you know what comes next, anxiety drops. Uncertainty creates noise. Structure removes it. That's the key. Here's what you stop doing. Stop waking up without a plan. Stop deciding important things while emotional. Stop letting mood dictate behavior. Here's what you start doing. You design your day once. You repeat it. You refine it slowly. Repetition is calming. Chaos is exhausting. Discipline builds mental silence. Say it again. Discipline builds mental silence. Stoicism understands this deeply. It teaches you to reduce unnecessary choice. Wear fewer options. Eat simpler meals. Schedule your work. Not to shrink life, but to focus it. Focus creates momentum. Momentum removes doubt, and doubt is the enemy of calm.
You don't need their permission to live simply. Simple is not small. Simple is sharp. When life is structured, emotions stop hijacking decisions. You train even when you don't feel like it. You rest when it's time. You work when the clock says work. Not because you're robotic, but because you respect yourself. Self-respect grows in silence. It grows when actions align with intention. That alignment is rare. That's why disciplined people stand out. They are not scattered. They are not reactive. They are not chaotic. They are grounded. Discipline doesn't trap you. It protects you from your worst impulses. It shields you from distraction. It guards you against burnout. It preserves energy. That's freedom. Most people chase freedom through options. Stoics build freedom through limits. Limits create depth. Depth creates mastery. Mastery creates peace. You have a choice. You can keep chasing flexibility, or you can build stability. Stability is underrated. Stable people don't panic easily. They don't overreact. They don't collapse under pressure. Their nervous system trusts the structure. That trust creates calm. This chapter is about reclaiming your mind, not by thinking more, but by deciding less. Decide once, execute daily. That's the Stoic way. You've learned control. You've learned emotional mastery. You've learned acceptance. You've learned detachment. You've learned the pause. Now you've learned structure. But structure exposes something uncomfortable. When you become disciplined, you realize how often words are unnecessary. Most people talk to fill chaos. Disciplined people don't. Silence becomes natural, and silence becomes powerful. You've built the inner order. Now let's talk about the outward expression of that order, because the next discipline is not about action. It's about restraint.
Most people talk too much. They explain their choices. They justify their decisions. They defend their position before it's even challenged. And they don't realize what it signals. Over-explaining is not clarity. It's insecurity. That's the key. When you explain too much, you reveal doubt. When you justify too much, you reveal fear. When you defend too quickly, you reveal weakness. Results don't need explanations. Say it again. Results don't need explanations. You have a choice. You can speak from confidence, or you can speak from need. One builds authority, the other leaks it. Look at strong leaders. They don't narrate their thinking constantly. They don't seek agreement from everyone. They don't rush to clarify themselves emotionally. They decide, they act, they let outcomes speak. That's power. People who explain excessively are usually asking for permission. Permission to be right. Permission to choose differently. Permission to disappoint. You don't need their permission. You don't need permission to stand by your decision. It's not about arrogance, it's about discipline. It's not about silence, it's about restraint. Restraint is confidence made visible. Most over-explaining comes from fear of being misunderstood. But here's the truth. You will be misunderstood anyway. No amount of explanation fixes that, so stop trying. That's the key. When you explain less, people listen more. When you justify less, your words carry weight. When you speak only when necessary, silence amplifies you. Silence creates space. Space creates authority. Look at meetings. The person who talks the most is rarely the most respected. The person who speaks briefly, clearly, deliberately, commands attention. Because they don't chase validation. They assume their position. You have a choice. You can keep filling space with words, or you can let silence do the heavy lifting. Strong people don't rush to be understood. They trust time and consistency. Results don't need explanations. Weak outcomes demand excuses. Strong outcomes close mouths. That's why Stoics speak less.
Not because they have nothing to say, but because they understand timing. Timing matters more than volume. Over-explaining also traps you emotionally. Once you justify yourself, you become invested in approval. Now you're negotiating emotionally. Now you're vulnerable. That's the trap. You don't need their permission to be firm. Firmness does not require explanation. A simple statement delivered calmly carries more power than a long emotional defense. Here's my decision. That's how I'm proceeding. I've considered it. Stop there. Anything after that is usually fear talking. That's the key. This doesn't mean you never explain. It means you explain intentionally, not reactively. There's a difference. Reactive explanations come from anxiety. Intentional explanations come from leadership. Here's the discipline. Before you explain anything, ask yourself one question. Am I explaining to inform or to be accepted? If it's to be accepted, stop. Silence is stronger. You have a choice. You can let discomfort push you into talking, or you can let discomfort pass without reaction. Discomfort always fades. Authority stays. Look at criticism. When criticized, emotional people rush to defend. They list reasons, they clarify intentions, they explain context. But criticism loses power when it isn't fed. A calm acknowledgement, or silence, or a brief correction if needed. Nothing more. That's discipline. Results don't need explanations. If your work is solid, it will show. If your standards are consistent, they'll be seen. If your actions align, no speech is required. Over time, people stop questioning you, not because you argued well, but because you acted consistently. Consistency replaces explanation. That's the Stoic method. This chapter is not about being mysterious. It's about being grounded. Grounded people don't over-explain. They trust their footing. You don't need their permission to stop talking. You don't need permission to let silence sit. Silence is not awkward when you're comfortable with yourself. Only insecure people fear quiet. Here's what you stop doing. Stop narrating your decisions. Stop justifying boundaries. Stop defending yourself emotionally. Here's what you start doing. You state decisions simply. You answer questions briefly. You let results accumulate. That's leadership. This also sharpens your thinking. When you speak less, you think clearly. Words become precise. Intentions become firm. Emotion stays contained. Contained emotion is strength. Uncontained emotion spills everywhere. It weakens presence. That's why calm, quiet people feel heavy. They're not scattered. They don't leak energy through unnecessary speech. They conserve it. Energy conserved becomes authority. Results don't need explanations. Repeat it until it replaces the urge to justify. This discipline changes how people treat you. They stop prying. They stop testing. They stop expecting emotional access. Because you don't offer it, and what isn't offered cannot be taken. You have a choice. You can keep explaining yourself into exhaustion, or you can act, wait, and let outcomes speak. The second path is quieter, but it's stronger. This chapter ties everything together. Control leads to calm. Calm leads to discipline. Discipline leads to restraint. Restraint leads to silence. And silence, used correctly, is a weapon. You've learned to stop explaining. Now it's time to go deeper. Because silence is not absence of speech, it's a strategy. You mastered restraint. Now let's talk about the discipline that turns silence into dominance.
Most people wait for hardship to teach them. That's a mistake. Hardship does not teach gently. It overwhelms the unprepared. That's the key. The Stoic does not wait to be tested. They train before the test arrives. Prepared minds don't panic. Say it again. Prepared minds don't panic. You have a choice. You can be surprised by difficulty, or you can expect it and be ready. Life will apply pressure. That is guaranteed. Loss will come. Stress will rise. Conflict will appear. The question is never if. The question is how you meet it. Most people meet hardship emotionally. Stoics meet it strategically. Mental rehearsal is the difference. Athletes do this instinctively. They visualize the hardest moments, the final seconds, the missed shot, the hostile crowd. They rehearse difficulty so it loses its shock. Soldiers do the same. They train under stress. They simulate chaos. They repeat scenarios until calm becomes automatic. Executives at the highest level do it too. They run worst-case scenarios. They imagine failure. They prepare responses. Not to worry, but to remove fear. Fear thrives on the unknown. Preparation kills it. That's the key. Prepared minds don't panic. Most people avoid thinking about difficulty. They call it negative. They call it pessimistic. That avoidance makes them fragile. Stoicism does the opposite. It says, look directly at what could go wrong, then prepare. Not emotionally, practically. You don't need their permission to do this. You don't need permission to think ahead. This is not about expecting disaster. It's about building resilience. Resilience is trained, not hoped for. You have a choice. You can hope things go well, or you can prepare for when they don't. Hope is passive. Preparation is active. Mental rehearsal builds calm under pressure. When hardship arrives, the Stoic mind says, I've been here before. Not literally, but internally. That familiarity changes everything. The first time something happens, it shocks you. The second time, it informs you. The third time, it barely moves you. Rehearsal accelerates this process. That's the advantage. Here's how you train. First, name the hardship. What are you avoiding thinking about? Loss of income? Rejection? Failure? Conflict? Name it clearly. Vague fear is powerful. Specific fear is manageable. That's the key. Second, visualize yourself handling it well. Not perfectly, calmly. You see yourself breathing, thinking, choosing measured actions. You don't collapse, you don't panic, you don't rush. This trains the nervous system. The body learns safety in adversity. Prepared minds don't panic. Third, build practical safeguards. Savings, skills, relationships, health. Preparation is not just mental, it's structural. Stoics prepare externally to support internal calm. That's discipline. It's not about fear, it's about readiness. It's not about pessimism, it's about resilience. Most breakdowns happen because the mind says, this shouldn't be happening. Prepared minds say, I expected this, I'm ready. Expectation removes emotional shock. Shock is what causes panic. Remove shock and calm remains. That's the key. This also changes how you see discomfort. Cold, fatigue, silence, waiting. Stoics voluntarily experience mild hardship, not to suffer, but to train. They fast occasionally. They train in bad weather. They choose difficulty intentionally. So when real hardship comes, it's familiar. Familiarity breeds confidence. You don't need their permission to train this way. Comfort weakens resilience. Challenge strengthens it. That's not motivational talk. That's reality. A soft life creates a fragile mind. A disciplined life creates a resilient one. Prepared minds don't panic. Say it again. Prepared minds don't panic. Here's what you stop doing. Stop avoiding uncomfortable thoughts. Stop pretending things will always go smoothly. Stop outsourcing resilience to luck. Here's what you start doing. You imagine difficulty calmly. You plan responses. You train under controlled stress. This rewires your relationship with fear. Fear becomes information, not a command. That's the Stoic advantage. When others freeze, you move. When others panic, you think. When others collapse, you adapt. Not because you're special, but because you prepared. You have a choice. You can let hardship shape you violently,
or you can shape yourself quietly before it arrives. Quiet preparation beats loud panic every time. This chapter is about humility, accepting that life will test you, and confidence, knowing you can handle it. That combination is rare. That's why Stoics stand out under pressure. They are not surprised by difficulty. They are not offended by it. They are not emotionally hijacked by it. They trained for it. Prepared minds don't panic. This ties directly into the core of Stoicism. Control what you can, accept what you can't, prepare for what's coming. You've learned discipline, you've learned silence, you've learned restraint. Now you've learned preparation. But preparation reveals another truth. The more prepared you are, the less you need to react emotionally to criticism, insult, or disrespect, because you are no longer fragile. That leads to the next discipline, one that separates emotionally stable people from everyone else. You've trained for hardship. Now let's talk about becoming untouchable.
Most people are uncomfortable with silence. They rush to fill it. They talk to ease tension. They explain to reduce anxiety. And that discomfort is exactly why silence is powerful. That's the key. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is pressure. Silence starves chaos. Say it again. Silence starves chaos. Emotional people need reaction. They need feedback. They need validation. They need resistance. When they don't get it, they unravel. You have a choice. You can feed chaos with words, or you can starve it with silence. Arguments are fueled by response. Remove the response, and the fire dies. That's not theory. That's human behavior. Look at arguments. One person escalates. They provoke. They push. They are seeking engagement. Silence denies it. No counterattack. No defense. No emotional fuel. The argument collapses. Silence starves chaos. That's why disciplined people are hard to provoke. They don't give emotional people what they want. They don't react on demand. You don't need their permission to be silent. You don't need permission to let tension exist. Tension is not dangerous. Reaction is. Most people confuse silence with weakness. But weak people talk to protect their ego. Strong people stay quiet to protect their position. That's the difference. Silence creates asymmetry. The one who speaks reveals. The one who listens learns. The one who stays silent holds leverage. That's the key. In negotiations, silence forces the other side to fill the gap. They explain more. They reveal priorities. They weaken their position. In conflict, silence removes escalation. You don't match their volume. You don't match their energy. You remain centered. Centered people dominate emotional ones. Not aggressively, naturally. You have a choice. You can treat silence as awkward, or you can treat it as strategic. Silence gives you time. Time to think. Time to observe. Time to choose. Reaction steals all three. Silence is not avoidance, it's restraint. Restraint is strength under control. That's the Stoic way. Here's the discipline. When someone provokes you, say nothing. Not forever, just long enough. Long enough for emotion to pass. Long enough for them to expose themselves. That's the key. Emotional people can't handle silence. They start talking more. They escalate. They contradict themselves. Silence turns their chaos inward. Silence starves chaos. This also applies internally. Most inner chaos is fed by mental noise, overthinking, replaying, arguing with yourself. Silence interrupts that loop. When you stop feeding thoughts with attention, they weaken. External silence supports internal calm. That's power. You don't need their permission to stop explaining. You don't need permission to stop reacting. Silence is always available, and it costs nothing.
but it demands discipline. Most people can't tolerate it. They fear what silence reveals: discomfort, insecurity, uncertainty. Stoics sit with it. They let silence do the work. Here's what you stop doing. Stop responding to every provocation. Stop defending yourself emotionally. Stop filling gaps with unnecessary words. Here's what you start doing. You pause. You listen. You respond only when it serves you. That response may be one sentence or none. That's authority. People feel it. They may not like it, but they respect it. Respect doesn't come from winning arguments. It comes from not needing to argue. Silence starves chaos. Say it again. Silence starves chaos. This chapter is not about being passive. It's about being selective. Selective engagement is power. You don't swing at every punch. You don't chase every comment. You don't correct every misunderstanding. You choose your battles, and you choose them calmly. This makes you unpredictable. Emotional people rely on predictable reactions. When reactions don't come, they lose control. That's the advantage. Silence also strengthens your presence. When you speak less, your words carry more weight. When you speak after silence, people listen. Because silence creates contrast. Contrast creates impact. You have a choice. You can keep feeding noise, or you can let quiet do the work. Noise exhausts you. Silence preserves you. This chapter completes an important shift. You've learned control. You've learned emotional mastery. You've learned acceptance. You've learned detachment. You've learned discipline. You've learned preparation. Now you've learned silence. Silence is the visible proof of inner order. But there's one final trap that silence helps you avoid: offense. Because offense is an emotional hook, and if you don't master it, everything else collapses. You've learned to starve chaos externally. Now it's time to eliminate it internally. You mastered silence. Now let's talk about becoming untouchable.
Most people believe offense is automatic. They say, "That offended me," as if offense arrived on its own, as if they had no say. That's false. Offense is a choice. That's the key. Nothing touches me without permission. Say it again. Nothing touches me without permission. Ego demands reaction. Discipline denies it. You have a choice. You can let other people's words enter your nervous system, or you can stop them at the gate. Most people have no gate. Every comment walks in. Every opinion takes a seat. Every criticism rearranges the furniture. That's why they're exhausted. Offense is emotional ownership handed away. The moment you feel offended, you've accepted someone else as your emotional authority. That's the trap. It's not about toughness, it's about discipline. It's not about pride, it's about stability. Stable identity makes criticism irrelevant. When you know who you are, words bounce. When you don't, words penetrate. That's the difference. Look at criticism. Criticism only hurts when it lands on uncertainty. If you already know your weaknesses, feedback is information. If you already trust your standards, insults lose power. If you already respect yourself, disrespect is noise. That's the key. People who are easily offended are usually unsure. Unsure of their value, unsure of their direction, unsure of their worth. So they react to protect the ego. Reaction feels like strength, but it's not. It's exposure. You don't need their permission to be unoffendable. You don't need permission to stop reacting emotionally. Becoming unoffendable does not mean tolerating disrespect. It means choosing how you respond. There's a difference. Disrespect does not require emotional reaction. It requires strategic response, or none. Most people confuse reaction with response. Reaction is emotional. Response is intentional. That's power.
You have a choice. You can take everything personally, or you can take responsibility for your state. Stoicism teaches this ruthlessly. It says, no one can offend you without your cooperation. That sentence alone removes half of human suffering, because offense is optional. Say it again, nothing touches me without permission. Here's how you train this. First, separate words from identity. Words are sounds. Opinions are noise. Judgments are projections. They are not facts. The moment you treat them as facts, you suffer. That's the key. Second, examine the source. Is this person someone you respect? Is their opinion informed? Is their criticism constructive? If not, it's irrelevant. If yes, it's useful, not offensive. Either way, offense is unnecessary. Third, anchor identity internally. When your standards come from within, external noise loses power. You don't need their permission to define yourself. Most people outsource identity. They wait to be validated. They wait to be approved. They wait to be praised. That makes them fragile. Stoics build identity privately, through effort, through discipline, through consistency. That identity doesn't shake, so criticism hits armor, not skin. Prepared minds don't panic, and stable minds don't get offended. That's the advantage. Here's what you stop doing. Stop labeling feelings as automatic. Stop saying, they made me feel. Stop reacting to every comment. No one makes you feel anything. You choose. Here's what you start doing. You observe the trigger. You name the emotion. You choose your response. That pause changes everything. The ego wants to defend itself loudly. Discipline defends position quietly. It's not about winning arguments. It's about protecting focus. Offense is distraction. Distraction steals energy. Energy wasted on offense is energy not used for progress. That's the real cost. People who get offended often say they value respect, but respect starts internally. If you respect yourself, you don't need constant reinforcement. You don't need to correct everyone. You don't need to prove yourself. You don't need to react. Silence and indifference are often the strongest responses. That's not weakness, that's mastery. Nothing touches me without permission. Say it again. Nothing touches me without permission. This mindset also protects your peace. Peace is not fragile. It's guarded. Guarded by boundaries, guarded by discipline, guarded by perspective. Perspective shrinks offense instantly. In the long run, opinions fade, comments disappear, noise moves on, but your work remains. Your standards remain. Your progress compounds. That's the Stoic focus. You have a choice. You can live in reaction, or you can live in direction. Offense pulls you sideways. Direction pulls you forward. Forward is where power lives. This chapter completes a major transformation. You've learned control. You've learned emotional mastery. You've learned acceptance. You've learned detachment. You've learned discipline. You've learned silence. Now you've learned invulnerability. Not physical, mental. Mental invulnerability doesn't mean nothing affects you. It means nothing controls you. That's the goal. But there's one more refinement, because even when you're unoffendable, there's still a temptation to chase something dangerous. Praise, approval, validation, and that can quietly undo everything. You've stopped reacting to criticism. Now it's time to stop depending on applause. You mastered offense. Now let's talk about measurement.
Most people don't want success. They want recognition. That's the uncomfortable truth. They say they want growth, but what they really want is applause. That's the key. External validation creates emotional dependency. The moment you need praise to stay motivated, you've handed control to people who don't care about your long-term progress. Track growth, not applause. Say it again. Track growth, not applause. You have a choice. You can work for claps, or you can work for results. One feels good briefly, the other compounds quietly. Praise is loud. Progress is silent. That's why most people chase praise. Silence makes them uncomfortable, but silence is where real work happens. Look at quiet consistency. The person who trains daily without posting about it. The person who studies without announcing it. The person who improves without broadcasting it. They win in the long run. Not because they are more motivated, but because they are less distracted. That's the key. Motivation fluctuates. Discipline compounds. It's not about excitement, it's about discipline. It's not about attention, it's about alignment. When you measure yourself by praise, your behavior changes. You start performing instead of progressing. You choose visible tasks over important ones. You optimize for likes, not leverage. You seek approval, not improvement. That's the trap. You don't need their permission to grow quietly. You don't need permission to stop posting every step. Progress does not need witnesses. Results eventually speak. Track growth, not applause. This also stabilizes your emotions. Praise creates highs. Silence creates doubt. Criticism creates crashes. That emotional roller coaster drains focus. Stoics opt out. They choose internal metrics. Did I show up? Did I improve slightly? Did I keep my standards? Those questions build stability. Stability builds confidence. Confidence built on internal standards does not shake. That's the advantage. Here's how you apply this. First, define clear, measurable behaviors. Not goals, behaviors. Train 4 times a week. Write daily. Study 1 hour. You measure actions, not reactions. Second, track privately. Write it down. Review weekly. No announcement, no performance, just data. That's the key. Third, detach from immediate feedback. Some days will feel unproductive. Some efforts will go unnoticed. That does not mean they don't matter. Quiet inputs create loud outcomes later. You have a choice. You can chase immediate validation, or you can invest in delayed results. Delayed results require patience. Patience is a Stoic skill. Most people quit because praise fades. They stop when no one is watching. Stoics continue. They don't need an audience to stay disciplined. That's strength. External validation is unstable. One compliment lifts you, one critique drops you. That's not freedom. Freedom comes from self-trust. Self-trust comes from keeping promises to yourself. Every time you follow your plan, you deposit into that trust. No one needs to see it. Track growth, not applause. Say it again. Track growth, not applause. This also protects you from ego inflation. Praise can make you complacent. You start believing you've arrived. You stop refining. Quiet workers don't fall into that trap. They stay focused. They measure process, not praise. This chapter ties back to everything you've learned. Control what you can, your effort. Release what you can't, opinions. Accept reality, detach from outcomes, stay disciplined, use silence. Progress thrives in that environment. You don't need their permission to move at your own pace. You don't need permission to be unseen for a while. Some of the strongest work is invisible. That invisibility is protective. It shields you from distraction. It shields you from ego. It shields you from comparison. Comparison kills progress. Internal metrics save it. You have a choice. You can let praise dictate your energy, or you can let standards guide it. Standards don't fluctuate. Standards don't disappear. Standards don't lie. That's the key. Here's what you stop doing. Stop checking for validation constantly. Stop measuring success by attention. Stop adjusting behavior for approval. Here's what you start doing. You measure consistency. You review progress weekly. You refine quietly. This builds a deep kind of confidence. Not loud, not flashy, grounded. Grounded people don't seek applause.
They seek mastery. Mastery takes time, and time is the most honest metric. This chapter prepares you for the final shift. When you stop chasing praise, you become aware of something deeper. Time. Time wasted. Time invested. Time remaining. Because when approval no longer distracts you, you start asking better questions. How much time do I have? How am I using it? You've learned to measure progress. Now let's talk about the ultimate perspective shift, the one that sharpens urgency and eliminates triviality. You mastered growth without applause. Now let's talk about the clock.
Most people live as if time is unlimited. They postpone. They hesitate. They waste energy on trivial things. That illusion is expensive. That's the key. Time is the only currency. Say it again. Time is the only currency. Everything else is replaceable. Money can return. Status can recover. Opportunities can reappear. Time never does. You have a choice. You can live distracted by nonsense, or you can live with urgency sharpened by truth. That truth is simple. You are going to die. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but one day this ends. And when you remember that, clarity appears instantly. Arguments shrink, ego quiets, trivial stress evaporates. That's the power of mortality. Stoics don't avoid this thought. They use it, not to become fearful, but to become precise. When you remember death, priorities reorder themselves. What matters rises. What doesn't matter falls away. That's the key. Think about the last argument that drained you. Would it matter on your final day? Would the opinion, the insult, the delay? No. So why does it matter now? Because you forgot the clock. Time is the only currency. Most people spend it like it's free. Hours scrolling, days complaining, years hesitating, and then they wonder why life feels empty. Urgency is not panic. Urgency is focus. There's a difference. Panic rushes blindly. Urgency moves deliberately. Stoicism trains urgency through perspective. It says, you don't have time for nonsense. That sentence alone eliminates half of modern anxiety. Because anxiety often comes from misplaced importance. You magnify what doesn't matter. You ignore what does. Mortality flips that. You stop chasing approval. You stop feeding ego. You stop engaging in pointless conflict. Because you see the cost. Every argument costs time. Every distraction costs time. Every emotional spiral costs time. Time is the only currency. You don't need their permission to value it. You don't need permission to walk away from triviality. Remembering death does not make life dark. It makes it sharp. It cuts away excess. Here's what changes when you accept mortality. You stop waiting for perfect conditions. You stop postponing difficult conversations. You stop delaying important work. Because later is not guaranteed. That's the key. This doesn't mean reckless action. It means intentional action. You choose deliberately what deserves your energy. Energy spent wisely multiplies. Energy wasted disappears. Most people are busy. Few are effective. Effectiveness comes from urgency with discipline. It's not about fear. It's about focus. It's not about stress. It's about clarity. When you remember the end, you respect the present. Every hour becomes valuable. And when something is valuable, you guard it. Stoics guard time fiercely. They don't give it away easily. Not to gossip, not to outrage, not to meaningless drama. They ask one question constantly. Is this worth my time? If the answer is no, they move on. No explanation, no guilt. You don't need their permission to do the same. Here's the practice.
Once a day, remind yourself, this day will not repeat. Not emotionally, factually. That reminder sharpens behavior. You speak more honestly. You act more decisively. You waste less energy. That's the key. Mortality also dissolves fear. Fear says, what if I fail? Mortality says, what if I never try? One question paralyzes, the other mobilizes. When you accept that time is limited, risk becomes more acceptable, because regret is heavier than failure. Most people fear embarrassment. They should fear inaction. Inaction compounds quietly. Years pass. Opportunities close. Energy fades. Then urgency arrives too late. Stoics don't wait for that moment. They borrow urgency now. Time is the only currency. Say it again. Time is the only currency. This also reframes success. Success is not accumulation, it's alignment. Alignment between how you live and what actually matters to you. Mortality clarifies that alignment brutally. You realize what you would regret not doing, and you start doing it. That's transformation. Here's what you stop doing. Stop arguing about trivial things. Stop investing emotion in meaningless opinions. Stop delaying work that matters. Here's what you start doing. You prioritize health. You prioritize skill. You prioritize contribution. Because these outlast moods. This chapter is not about becoming obsessed with death. It's about becoming loyal to life. Life lived consciously. Life lived deliberately. Life lived without unnecessary distraction. You have a choice. You can forget the clock and drift, or you can remember it and act. Act calmly, act consistently, act with purpose. This chapter completes the internal foundation. You've learned control, you've learned composure, you've learned acceptance, you've learned detachment, you've learned discipline, you've learned silence, you've learned resilience, you've learned focus. Now you understand urgency. But urgency introduces responsibility, because once you know time is limited, you must decide how to use influence. And influence starts with one place only: yourself. You've accepted mortality. Now let's talk about leadership, beginning internally.
Most people want influence. They want authority. They want respect. They want to lead. But they skip the first requirement: self-mastery. That's the key. You cannot lead others beyond the level you lead yourself. Your state becomes the standard. Say it again. Your state becomes the standard. You have a choice. You can try to control people, or you can control yourself and let that do the work. Leadership is not a title, it's a condition. And that condition starts internally. Look at emotional leaders. They react under pressure. They change direction based on mood. They communicate frustration instead of clarity. What happens next? Their teams become anxious. Their environments become unstable. Their standards become inconsistent. Not because the team is weak, but because the leader is unregulated. That's the truth most people avoid. Your state becomes the standard. If you are calm, others calm down. If you are reactive, others become defensive. If you are disciplined, others follow structure. Leadership is contagious. So is chaos. You don't need their permission to lead yourself. You don't need permission to regulate your emotions. Self-mastery is private, but its effects are public. Stoicism understands this deeply. It teaches that leadership begins with command over impulse. Impulse says react. Discipline says choose. That difference defines authority. It's not about charisma, it's about discipline. It's not about dominance, it's about consistency. People don't trust intensity, they trust stability. Stability comes from self-leadership. That's the key. Here's the hard truth.
If you can't manage your mood, you can't manage responsibility. If you can't manage stress, you can't manage people. If you can't manage yourself, you can't lead anything long term. This is not criticism, it's reality. And reality is useful. You have a choice. You can ignore this and chase influence, or you can build influence from the inside out. Stoics choose the second path. They start with inner order, sleep, routine, emotional regulation, clarity of values. These are leadership skills, not flashy, not visible, but foundational. Most leadership failures are internal failures first: burnout, ego, insecurity, inconsistency. Self-mastery prevents these. That's why Stoic leaders feel solid. They don't overreact, they don't overshare, they don't panic publicly. They process privately, and that creates trust. Your state becomes the standard. Say it again. Your state becomes the standard. This applies everywhere: at work, at home, in friendships, in crisis. People mirror what they experience. If you bring calm, calm spreads. If you bring tension, tension multiplies. Leadership is emotional transmission. You are always teaching, even when you say nothing. That's the key. Here's what self-leadership looks like in practice. You don't vent downward. You don't dump stress on others. You don't make decisions emotionally. You pause, you regulate, you respond. That's leadership. You don't need their permission to hold yourself to a higher standard. Higher standards reduce the need for control. When you're consistent, you don't need to micromanage. When you're calm, you don't need to intimidate loudly. When you're disciplined, you don't need to motivate loudly. Your presence does the work. That's power. Self-mastery also creates moral authority. People listen more closely when they see alignment, when words match actions, when promises are kept, when behavior is predictable. Predictability builds trust. Trust builds influence. Influence builds leadership. That chain always starts internally. You have a choice. You can demand respect, or you can become someone who naturally receives it. Demanding is weak. Becoming is strong. It's not about image, it's about discipline. It's not about control, it's about character. Character is revealed under pressure. That's why Stoics train under pressure. They don't wait for leadership moments. They practice composure daily. Small disciplines, small restraints, small choices. These compound. One day, people notice, not because you announced leadership, but because you embodied it. Your state becomes the standard. This chapter also forces honesty. If people around you are chaotic, ask yourself why. If your environment is emotional, check your signals. Leadership is responsibility without excuses. You don't blame the team, you adjust the standard. That adjustment starts with you. Here's what you stop doing. Stop blaming others for emotional environments. Stop reacting and calling it leadership. Stop expecting behavior you don't model. Here's what you start doing. You regulate first. You speak second. You act consistently. That order matters. Self first, others next. This does not mean isolation. It means accountability. Accountability for your tone. Accountability for your reactions. Accountability for your habits. Habits are leadership in disguise. People follow what you repeat. That's the key. When you lead yourself well, leadership stops feeling heavy. You're not forcing behavior. You're setting a pace. Others either rise to it or fall away. Both outcomes are clean. Clean leadership reduces friction, and friction wastes time. Time is the only currency. This chapter ties everything together. Control leads to calm. Calm leads to discipline. Discipline leads to consistency. Consistency leads to trust. Trust leads to leadership. All of it starts inside. You have a choice. You can wait for permission to lead, or you can lead yourself, starting now. No announcement, no title, no applause, just standards. Standards lived daily. This prepares you for the final step, because once you lead yourself, you become something rare, unshakable. Not because life gets easier, but because you don't collapse under it. You've learned to lead yourself. Now it's time to seal everything, to become steady regardless of circumstance. You mastered inner leadership. Now let's talk about the final state.
Most people treat Stoicism like an idea, something interesting, something philosophical, something they agree with but don't live. That's the mistake. Stoicism is not a concept, it's a practice. That's the key. You don't become unshakable by understanding Stoicism. You become unshakable by applying it daily. Stillness wins wars. Say it again. Stillness wins wars. Not loud confidence, not emotional intensity, not motivation. Stillness. You have a choice. You can practice calm only when life is easy, or you can practice it every day so it's there when life gets hard. Consistency is what hardens the mind. Calm practiced once is fragile. Calm practiced daily becomes automatic. That's the difference between people who break and people who bend without snapping. Becoming unshakable does not mean nothing affects you. It means nothing controls you. Pressure comes, you stay steady. Criticism comes, you remain centered. Loss comes, you adjust without collapsing. That stability compounds over years. That's the power most people underestimate. Stillness wins wars. Look back at everything you've learned. You learned to control what you can. You learned to master emotion. You learned to accept reality. You learned detachment. You learned discipline. You learned silence. You learned preparation. You learned to be unoffendable. You learned to measure progress. You learned urgency. You learned self-leadership. None of that works occasionally. It only works consistently. That's the key. Most people fail not because they lack knowledge, but because they lack repetition. They apply principles when they feel like it. Feelings are unreliable. Discipline is not. It's not about motivation. It's about discipline. It's not about intensity. It's about consistency. Unshakable people are not extreme. They are steady. They don't swing wildly between highs and lows. They don't react dramatically to every event. They operate from baseline calm. That calm is trained daily. You don't need their permission to train this way. You don't need permission to become stable in an unstable world. Stability is a choice repeated. Every morning, you choose composure. Every interaction, you choose restraint. Every setback, you choose adjustment. Those choices stack. One day, you realize something has changed. Things that used to shake you don't. People who used to provoke you can't. Situations that used to overwhelm you feel manageable. That's when you know the practice worked. Stillness wins wars. Wars are not always loud. Most wars are internal. Anxiety, ego, fear, impulse. Stillness defeats them quietly. You have a choice. You can keep reacting to life, or you can let life react to you. Reactive people are predictable. Unshakable people are grounded. Grounded people don't rush. They don't explain. They don't chase. They move deliberately. That deliberate pace is intimidating to chaos. Chaos feeds on speed and emotion. Stillness starves it. That's the key. Here's how you live this chapter. First, commit to daily practice. Not reading, not listening, practice. Pause before reacting. Accept what is, detach from outcomes. Choose discipline over comfort daily. Second, expect discomfort. Growth is uncomfortable. Restraint is uncomfortable.
Silence is uncomfortable. Discomfort is not a sign of failure, it's a sign of training. You don't avoid it, you normalize it. That's strength. Third, measure calm over time. Ask yourself weekly, did I react less? Did I pause more? Did I waste less energy? Those are real metrics, not applause, not praise, internal stability. That's the key. Unshakable people don't announce their strength. They don't need to. It shows in how they move, how they speak, how they handle pressure. Their presence feels solid. That presence is built, not gifted. Built through repetition. You have a choice. You can let life condition you emotionally, or you can condition yourself intentionally. One path leads to fragility, the other leads to quiet power. Quiet power lasts, loud power burns out. This is why Stoicism has outlasted centuries, because human nature hasn't changed. People are still reactive, still emotional, still distracted. The Stoic advantage remains rare, and that rarity is your edge. Stillness wins wars. Say it one last time. Stillness wins wars. This chapter seals the entire book. Stoicism is not something you use once, it's something you become. A way of moving, a way of thinking, a way of responding. You don't wait for permission, you don't wait for the right moment, you start now. One pause, one choice, one disciplined response at a time. That's how unshakable people are built. Not dramatically, not instantly, relentlessly. And once you reach that state, life doesn't get easier, you get stronger, calmer, clearer, unmovable. This is the Stoic advantage. Now close this audiobook and live it.
The Stoic advantage is simple. You stop wasting energy. You stop reacting. You stop chasing approval. You stop fighting reality. And suddenly, your mind becomes clear. Your actions become precise, and your presence becomes heavy. This is not about becoming emotionless. It's about becoming unmovable. The world will stay chaotic. People will stay emotional. Pressure will never disappear. The question is, will you stay stable inside it? Starting today, practice the pause. Choose discipline over comfort. Choose silence over reaction. Because the calm mind always outlasts the loud one. Now close this audiobook and live it.